Okay, so last week we did not get, hey, no, I don't want you. Where,
Just click on your slide. Go over to your slide and click on your slide.
there you, okay, and it went back to this view. Uh, um, okay, so last week we didn't really get to the Ethiopian canon, but there's so many fascinating things to talk about. I decided to devote an entire session to it because it is how it came to be is really interesting. Okay, since I can't not do the preview because I seem to be inept, can you read this? Um, so, just as a recap of what we've gone over, the Tanakh, which is, of course, the Jewish Bible, has 24 books. The Protestant Old Testament has 39 books, which of course is the exact same content as the Tanakh, just organized and divided up differently. The Catholic Old Testament has 46 books, and last week we talked about the content of some of those books. And honestly, this week I couldn't stop thinking about intoxicated elephants. Plus additions to Esther and Daniel. The Eastern Orthodox Old Testament has 49 to 52, depending on which Orthodox church you're talking about. Now, the Ethiopian Old Testament has the most. It has 50 to 54. So let's review what is canon. Canon is taken from a Greek word, canon, called measuring rod, and it's the standard by which a community recognizes which books carry divine authority. And as you can see, different Christian sects came up with a different list. So let's find out, dang it, why Ethiopia has a different canon than what we do. Okay, so the full name of the Ethiopian church is the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. Now, Tewahedo is actually, even though we don't know what it is actually an important part of Ethiopian canon and has a different spin on the nature of Christ than what the Western church has. So Tewahedo is a Ge'ez word, and Ge'ez, of course, is the Ethiopian ancient literary language in which the scriptures are written. It's not spoken by anybody today, but it's kind of like Bible speaking in Latin or Greek for us. We can't read them, but if you know Ge'ez, you can read it. And the word Tewahedo means being one or unity. So it refers to Christology. And all Christology means is what is the nature of Christ. And they understand that Christ's divine and human natures are united in one nature, without separation, without mixture. Now, you would think that that wouldn't be all that different from what we believe. But in 451 CE, that position by the Ethiopian church caused a schism in the Byzantine, the Western Church, and Ethiopian. And they said, no, no, you're not Christian. No, no, you're not Christian. And that happened at the Council of Chalcedon. So, where did I have more about that later. So let's talk about how the Ethiopian church came to be. It's definitely one of the oldest Jewish and Christian communities in the world. So unlike some other African countries that had European missionaries come to it, Ethiopia was a standalone, and they are ancient, not from the missionaries. And so you may remember in Acts chapter 8, Philip is directed by the Spirit to go on the road from Jerusalem to Gaza. And there he encounters a man who is a high-ranking court official. He's a treasurer serving Candace, the queen of Ethiopia. Now he's come to Jerusalem to worship, which tells us that he is already familiar with the God of Israel. So this is not new. He's sitting in his chariot reading from the prophet Isaiah. And specifically, he's reading Isaiah 53, which is about the suffering servant. So Philip goes up to him and says, "Do you understand what you're reading?" And the man said, "How can I unless somebody guides me?" So Philip climbs in the chariot, explains the passage, proclaims Jesus, and the Ethiopian eunuch is baptized right there on the side of the road. It's one of the earliest conversion stories in the Bible, and it's an Ethiopian. Now, the Ethiopian church doesn't just point to this one event as how they got established. So the formal Ethiopian church was established around 330 CE. So it existed before then, obviously. But King Ezana, you know him, right?
No.
From the famous kingdom of Axum, with which you are equally familiar. That's when he said, "This is the official state religion of Ethiopia." And interestingly, that was right at the same time that Constantine, who was the first Roman emperor who made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, it's concurrent, but completely independent. Now, Ethiopia's story goes even farther back than the man that Philip encountered on the road. So what they claim is that their history goes all the way back to the Queen of Sheba. And Queen of Sheba is from 1 Kings chapter 10. And there's a great queen who visits Solomon, She is so impressed by his wisdom. They exchange gifts. And Ethiopian tradition said that Sheba, she was an Ethiopian queen. In fact, they go as far as saying that Solomon, that the Ark of the Covenant ended up in Ethiopia. Don't know how that is, but that's one of their beliefs. Uh, of course, it's debatable, but it speaks to the Ethiopians like independent beliefs, independent traditions. They share core books with Western Christians, but they have their own history, their own traditions. So here are some things that are really fascinating about the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. They still practice circumcision. And it's on the 8th day, which, as you may know, was specifically in the New Testament. The Jerusalem Council said, no, it's not necessary for Gentiles to get circumcised to be Christians. But the Ethiopian church continues that. They observe dietary laws that are very similar to the ones that the Jewish people practice, like restrictions on pork. And interestingly, they celebrate both the Saturday Sabbath, which is what the Jewish people celebrate, as well as Sunday worship. So, of course, as I said, Ge'ez is their liturgical or church language. And it's an ancient Semitic language that they still use in worship. And the Ethiopian Bible would have been translated from the Greek. So the Septuagint. So, what are your thoughts about a Christian group that still has these practices?
Well, in Acts, it talks about people who have dietary restrictions and pretty much asks us to respect what others believe about diet. I think that it shouldn't be a big deal. As long as it wasn't what was it?
Stumbling block?
Well, no, meat that was strangled or what was the other one?
Yes. Sexual immorality and meat that still had blood in it.
Yeah, something like that. Oh, that was sacrificed for
Idols.
Yeah, so.
Some of the Old Testament stuff about circumcision really wasn't done in Egypt. It was actually done when they crossed into the Jordan, across the Jordan River was when they did the circumcision of the masses. But it's health issues as well. They found that certain health issues, circumcision makes you more potent for, I don't know how would I say that.
You're gonna say breeding.
Breeding.
You say that.
I didn't want to say it too loud for breeding, but certain foods shouldn't be eaten at certain times, like the blood. I mean, we all bloodborne pathogens, as we all know, now. but some of those were just good health issues.
Mm-hmm.
That they were, now, I've been involved with kosher
Kosher.
products, and that's a scam, okay, because I'll be quite
What
honest.
do you really think, Carl?
That's what I really think, okay, you're gonna just have to put up with. I worked in a food processing plant. We had to get the rabbi to come in and bless the alcohol process. And he had to shave. Well, he said, well, that's gonna cost you another $5,000, you know.
For him to shave,
Oh, yeah,
shave his face.
chemical processing or food processing plant where you use chemicals, you never know when you're gonna have to don your SCBA's, your self-contained breathing apparatus. What if you get a leak, chemical? People die.
I see.
So you have to be clean shaven all the time.
So employees can.
So the employees couldn't have beards either. So
Okay.
nobody that come into the plant that was gonna be in a process had to, you couldn't have a beard.
$5,000 to shave.
Yeah. Well, it was $10,000 for the blessed process. It cost another $5,000 for the shave.
And how often do you have to do that process? That blessing?
It depends on Jewish faith, you know, how often. I don't remember. It was the initial process. But it's basically just blessing the process. And then that way you can label all your alcohol kosher. Cause you just,
Or your other products.
and that's why I say it's a scam, because, you know, they come in, they bless the we made sweeteners too, Equal, you ever heard of Equal?
Yeah.
Well, you bless that one and then you bless the other, so you can put your name kosher. You can say, well, it's been kosher. All right, and basically it just means it's been blessed by the Jewish faith. Nothing changes chemically. It's just they bless it. Okay. So that's why I say a scam. You know, some of that just, you know,
What part
making
of
money.
Nebraska was that?
Huh?
What part of Nebraska was that?
It was in Indiana.
Oh, Indiana.
Yeah.
Originally,
Originally, well, we have a plant in Iowa and a plant there. The guy do both plants.
oh, gosh.
But but I think it's good. Some things are good health issues that they came with, and Ethiopians being one of the oldest sects, you know, one of the offshoots of Judaism, I think, right?
Yes.
I mean, they're older than probably the Coptic Christians. Coptic Christians, we haven't talked about, but Coptic Christians, they align, some of those things, they line up with the Mormons. I mean, it's kind of shocking when you compare the two, like Coptic and Mormon. Woo. But yeah, I mean, they kind of line up to the kind of same beliefs. But I can understand the food issue.
Thank you. Okay, so what's in the Ethiopian Old Testament? It has everything that's in the Tanakh, which is the same as our Old Testament. It has all the stuff we talked about last week that are in the Catholic Bible: Tobit, Judith, Wisdom of Solomon, Sirach, Baruch, and Maccabees, and the additions to Esther and Daniel. So far it sounds like a Catholic Bible. But this is where it goes further. It includes books that no other Christian tradition in the world consider canonical. And they're not like little books. These are our major books. And let me talk to you about one of the most famous ones, which is First Enoch. And who's heard of Enoch?
You know, I think we all heard of that.
Okay. Enoch 1, also known as the Book of Enoch, is attributed to the patriarch Enoch from Genesis chapter 5. So Enoch is Noah's great-grandfather.
Right.
And there's only one thing that our Bible tells us. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That's from Genesis 5:24.
He's one of the two that were taken.
That's exactly. He and Elijah or one of the two figures in the Old Testament who never died. And that's it. That's all we get. So first Enoch is attributed to this guy, Enoch, but as we talked about last week, lots of times books are attributed to famous people from the Old Testament that may or may not be famous people from the Old Testament. So first Enoch contains 108 chapters. It was composed in stages over 200 years, from 300 BCE to 100 BCE. So based on those dates, you can already tell why the Tanakh would not have included it, because they believed that everything cut off 400 BCE. So this was written after it. And what's interesting is that it's a collection of 5 distinct works that are not necessarily considered, obviously with this time range, not necessarily considered to be written by the same author. The most famous section is chapters 1 through 36. It's called the Book of, and I forgot to say also about First Enoch, it is quoted in our New Testament in Jude. There's 11 fragments of it in the Dead Sea Scroll, but they're only fragments. The Ethiopian Bible is the only complete version of Enoch. So the Book of the Watchers tells the story of the fallen angels. You remember the Nephilim? So this gives us a lot more about the Nephilim. And it tells you the story that angels rebelled against God and taught humanity forbidden teachings. And they did breeding, Carl.
Yep.
With,
There's a third of them that the fallen angels is a third of the angel population, right?
don't know. I can look it up, but
Well,
I don't know.
Okay.
So these giants were very violent.
What do you believe?
I have a horrendous Mormon background, so let's leave it at that.
Oh, okay.
That's where Goliath came from.
So
Oh,
according to First Enoch, that's what caused God to bring on the flood. It was these giants, so they had taught mankind terrible things like weapons and makeup, and so he wiped them out. Now, another interesting book is the Book of Jubilees. And there are 15 separate fragments. Oh, I say First Enoch, but that's a typo. Jubilees found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So even more than Enoch. And it actually retells Genesis and Exodus. And what's fascinating about Jubilees for Christians is that the phrase the Son of Man is very prominent. And of course, that Jesus uses that frequently to describe himself. Now, Jubilees also has an astronomical book, and it describes their 364-day solar calendar. And, I skipped around. I talked about Jubilees too early. Everything I told you about Jubilees was correct, but I wasn't done with Enoch. So after the Book of the Watchers, there's the astronomical book. This is still Enoch. Now, this was widely used up until the first century. It was excluded from the Tanakh, but based on how many fragments were in the Dead Sea Scrolls, a lot of people were reading it. And early church fathers also talked about it. Tertullian, you guys all know Tertullian, right? He's an early church father writing around 200 CEE, and he said it's scripture. Irenaeus and Clement of Alexandria, also early church fathers, referenced it very favorably. So it was only in the 4th century that it fell out of use and then was no longer accepted by the Western and the Byzantine churches. Yes.
Question. I don't know if it goes back far enough. Melchizedek
Yeah.
was, it's in Mormon religion quite a bit, but Melchizedek is considered most, the one Christophacy. And he may have been Christ before Christ
Yes.
came, right? Melchizedek. Does it speak at all of him in Enoch? Because it's so old. He was like a.
That's a good question. I can do some research, Carl, but I don't know the answer.
Because he was there when Abraham defeated.
Right. He blessed Abraham.
And Job, and then Abraham gave Melchizedek 1/10 of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I just worried maybe it was in there, tied in there someplace with, because that's a real significant thing for Abraham to give 1/10
Oh,
of
very.
his possessions to Melchizedek.
I'll look that up and let you know next time.
Okay.
So the Western world thought that Enoch was completely lost until 1773, when a Scottish explorer named James Bruce traveled to Ethiopia and brought 3 Ge'ez, which is their liturgical language, manuscripts back to Europe. So the world had to go back to Ethiopia to recover a book that Jude quoted. Okay, back to Jubilees. As I said, it was a retelling of Genesis through Exodus. It tells about a second revelation given to Moses on Mount Sinai. It was considered to be written between 160 and 150 BCE. So the name Jubilees comes from its chronological system. The entire history of the world is organized into Jubilee cycles of 49 years, 7 periods of 7 years. And Jubilees is referenced in the Old Testament, and every 49 years, you're supposed to forgive everybody's debts and set all your slaves free. There's no evidence that anybody actually did that.
Every 49, I thought it was every 7 years you were supposed to forgive sins.
Well, yes, that is correct. But Jubilees was like the big one. All your land, any land, like if you purchased somebody's ancestral land,
Yeah.
after 49 years, you have to give it back.
Yeah.
So Jubilees insists on a solar calendar. Now, you may or may not remember that Jewish tradition is based on the lunar calendar. And we talked about the Essenes last week, and one of their key differences from other Judaic sects was that they were following a solar calendar. So often their holidays fell on different days than the Jerusalem Jews were observing. Now, this is also interesting because the Ten Commandments that Moses received, for us, it doesn't show up till Moses, but the book of Jubilees has the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, following those rules. They observe in the book of Jubilees, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob observe festivals, they pay tithes, and they follow the purity laws. So, as we talked about, Jubilees was very popular. 15 different fragmentary manuscripts were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And like First Enoch, the only complete text of Jubilees survives in Ge'ez. So without Ethiopia, we would have lost that one too. So here is where things get even more interesting. So the Ethiopian Old Testament has books that are completely unique to them. They're not represented in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're not referenced by the early church fathers, but they're considered canon and scripture by the Ethiopian church. So these books, like if you read them, they're not like wild, far out stories. If you read them, they look like an Old Testament book. So it's not like they're reinventing the wheel or coming up with something that doesn't line up with the Old Testament. It just doesn't exist outside of their canon. So the Maccabean is those three books are about believers suffering for their devotion to God and vindicated by divine intervention. So, what do you think about books that are only represented in the Ethiopian Old Testament? Are they canon? Are they canon for the Ethiopians and they're not wrong? How should we, as Protestant Christians, approach these books, in your opinion?
I think we should know about them.
Yes.
Martin Luther went through the Bible and basically threw out what he didn't like.
Yeah,
That's not bad.
he took
That's
the
exactly what
Tanakh.
he did. That's exactly what he didn't like, he threw it,
Yeah, he threw it out.
he threw it out.
Yeah,
So
he excluded everything
and
but the
that's
Tanakh.
why we have what we have. But somewhere down, there's some kind of divine, I always hear this, well, the person that wrote the Bible, they were divine. They didn't make mistakes because they were divine. I'm thinking there's a lot of interpretation.
And you gotta watch out for that too.
Yeah.
Because most of the Bible is written within 600 and 800 years after Christ.
Right.
Was written by, the Peter and everybody's name got put on because everybody at that time thought that's what it was, but they can't. As you,
Actually, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, we know that And what we're focusing on, of course, is the Old Testament was written before Christ. Because it's represented in the Dead Sea
Of the Old
Scrolls.
Testament, yeah. Well, the book of Enoch, I can understand why they didn't, that 400 years, there's a lot of writings. In those 400 years, it probably should have been, somebody should have took note. I mean, maybe Ethiopians did that.
Well, and so did the Catholic canon. We talked about Maccabees last week. That happened during that 400 period.
Right,
Yeah.
Right,
And Jewish people do accept that as historical. They just don't accept it as canon. So,
See, I gotta keep my mouth shut. There's the whole church. You know, you were talking about the Ark of the Covenant, that whole piece. The Ethiopians have a church that no one, but one person a year is allowed to go.
right, right.
Okay,
Well,
they believe that the Ark of the Covenant is in that church. They
mhm.
believe the original Old Testament scriptures are in that church. And only one person a year, whatever high priest of the Ethiopian church, they choose him, and then he has to go through this whole ritual piece to get cleansed, so he can go into that.
That makes sense. I did not know that,
And,
Jessica.
it's, I mean, when you talk about the person who bought the 3 books, that person, the Ethiopian church hunted him down and killed him because of buying those. They were not allowed to do that. I mean, that was, we think that the Catholic Church is crazy. The Ethiopians, as far as keeping things straight, and you know, if you look at some things that are written about the Catholic Church in scriptures, the Jewish people are strict. If you make a mistake in your translation, sorry for you, you just about lost your life. You Ethiopians are even worse than that. If you even hinted at that you didn't know what you were writing and you made a mistake, you were gone. They didn't allow for mistakes. That's how I have a copy of the Ethiopian Bible, and I trust that more than my Mormon scriptures. For a group of people that's supposed to know, as far as the Ethiopian, that is it. They are so trusting what we believe in as Christ, God, that they have gotten answers. And over the years, because of things that I've done in my life and been places, I don't trust a lot of stuff anymore. Because of what I've learned and been to, and had family members go and do.
Well, we'll talk about more about trustworthiness when we talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, Jessica.
Yeah.
But you're right that the Ethiopian scribes were held to a very high
They would
standard.
cut your arm off. They would cut your hand off if you did it. And if you did it the second time, you were dead.
So the takeaway is that the Ethiopian Old Testament is its own body of work. It's not just the Catholic Bible with some extra things tacked on. It's a tradition that grew independently of the Western Church. It drew from ancient sources and preserved texts that the rest of the Christian world lost. So let's talk about why would the Ethiopian canon be so much broader? And we talked about Queen of Sheba and Solomon. So Judaism in Ethiopia was from the time of Solomon. So it has ancient roots. And so Enoch, and Jubilees, as we talked about, Western Christians knew about them, but they did not have copies of them. Now, when Christianity first arrived in Ethiopia in the 1st century through that unit that Philip converted, it existed, but it was not officially adopted by Ethiopia until the kingdom of Aksum. Now, At that point, there was the Western Church centered in Rome, there was the Byzantine Church, and there was the Ethiopian Church. And the councils that you hear about, the Council of Nicaea, weren't so much about what books belong in the Bible as theological points. And so the Ethiopian canon was developed outside of the doctrine and textual debates of the Roman and Byzantine worlds. So they just continued to use this full set of writings that they had. So what caused, we talked about how First Jude quotes Enoch. The early church fathers talk about Enoch. So how did we lose touch with it? And that's where, Ernie, you brought up a great point last week, and I looked more into it. When I said Ethiopia was landlocked and geographically isolated, that's not completely true. It is cut off by mountains and deserts, but it also had a Red Sea trading port. And in fact, the port of Adulis in Ethiopia was one of the busiest ports in the ancient world. And Axumite merchants, remember I said the kingdom of Axum, traded with Rome, Egypt, Arabia, India, and beyond. And in the 3rd through 6th centuries CE, the kingdom of Axum was considered one of the 4 great empires alongside Rome, Persia, and China. So Ethiopia was not this backwater country. It was a major player.
Can I just, how much of a major player Ethiopia was? 90% of what England, France, Germany, and all those wonderful things that were produced in those countries came from Ethiopia. I mean, the Nile had a big piece of that, but it's, you know, the Europeans say, oh, they created all this stuff. No, I have 2 really good friends that are from Ethiopia. Did you listen to them talk about their history? When I first met one of them, he said to me, "That's good." And he said, just like that, you stupid asinine American white people know nothing about us. And I said, why are you trading me? He said, everything that you think's worthwhile came from us.
Yeah.
You know, when I said, what do you mean?
Was coffee.
Yeah,
They gold, they have
gold, they're the ones that, you know, we talk about stainless steel. They were making stainless steel back before Europeans even knew what it was. One of the reasons why the Romans lost in the end to the countries of Ethiopia because of their stainless steel weapons.
Thank you. Few things I want to get to still, Jessica, but thank you for your contributions. So how did Ethiopia get cut off from the Western Church? Well, there was a theological break I talked to you about that happened at the Council of Chalcedon in 451. And actually, here's where I have a note, Carl, that the Ethiopian church, they considered the Coptic church in Egypt their mother church.
Oh, it did?
Yes. So, but what happened to Ethiopia? Now they were surrounded by Muslims. And communication between Ethiopia and the rest of the Christian world became nearly impossible. So its theological isolation came from Chalcedon, where they disagreed about the nature of Christ. And then their political isolation came from the Islamic conquests. And their geography helped them maintain the integrity from the Muslim world. So, interestingly, the Ethiopian Bible, as I said, was translated from the Greek as early as the 5th century CE. It was translated in Ge'ez. And actually, they worked from a variety of texts, Greek, Hebrew, and possibly Aramaic. And they gave great weight to texts that were in Hebrew, just like the Jewish people did. So, as you can tell from what we've been talking about, canonical diversity, there's a lot of it. Everybody shares the Tanakh, which is, of course, the Protestant Old Testament. But Catholics have books that we don't have. Orthodox have books that we don't have. Ethiopians have books that exist nowhere else. And even if we don't accept it as canon, it is useful to know. So next week, we're going to talk more about the Book of Enoch because it's so interesting, and I'll be able to answer your question about Melchizedek, Carl. So if you want to, you can read First Enoch online, chapters 1 through 5. I haven't given you homework yet, but there's a little bit of homework. So I'd like to close with a prayer from Jubilees. So if you read along with me, blessed be the Lord who has created heaven and earth, who keeps truth forever, and whose ways are righteous. May his blessings rest upon us, and may he guard us all the days of our life. Thank you. And now, Jessica.
When do you put this up on YouTube?
Probably Monday.
This thing, absent.
Oh, yeah.
They come